the history of thought appeared in the last 70 or even 20 years. Writing a book like this is a bit like trying to curate a best-of album for the Beatles. Sure, there are some things that absolutely must be included, such as Yesterday or Plato's Republic. But then, after getting the obvious hits, we have lots of options for filling out the rest. I must discuss Plato, Aristotle, Rousseau, de Tocqueville, and John Stuart Mill, but it's largely optional whether and how much I cover, say, Diderot, Montesquieu, Schmidt, or Nietzsche. Of course, just as with compiling a best-of album for the Beatles, reasonable people will disagree about which songs are necessary and optional. Even if this book were 3 times the length, I would have to make choices. Chapter 1. Democracy. Why or why not? For and against. Democracy is both an obvious and dubious idea. Here's why democracy is an obvious idea. For most of history, most governments divided people into the few who rule and the many who obey. The few then used the state to advance their own private interests at the expense of the many. Rulers were less like noble protectors appointed by God, and more like intestinal parasites. The obvious solution is to eliminate the distinction between those who rule and those who obey. Make every citizen both a ruler and a subject of that rule. This ensures government promotes everyone's interests. Thus, democracy is the best form of government. It's too bad it took most of civilized history to realize this. And too bad that the world isn't more democratic than it is. Here's why democracy is a dubious idea. Government decisions are high stakes. It decides matters of war and peace, prosperity and poverty, freedom or oppression. Yet we let incompetent people steer the ship of state. Most voters are ignorant and process what little information they have in biased and irrational ways. They fall prey to propaganda and demagogues. They are conformists and don't even try to vote their interests. Democracy is the political equivalent of drunk driving. Thus, democracy is a defective form of government. Democracy is a method by which the masses shoot themselves in their feet. Philosophy students often start essays by writing, "Since the dawn of time, humanity has pondered." In this case, these arguments and concerns are old, if not dawn of time old. We can find laypeople, pundits, social scientists, and philosophers making these 2 arguments today. But in ancient Athens, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle said similar things. Today, many Westerners assume that democracy is not only the best form of government, but also the only legitimate form. Yet at the same time, most admit that democracy, as we find it, has serious problems. Most of these problems, they'll add, could be fixed if only their favorite party had uncontested power. For most of Western history, the word democracy was pejorative. Aristotle used the term democracy to refer to the degenerate or deviant form of the rule of the many. Today, you can still find smug AP U.S. history students saying, "The United States is a republic, not a democracy." Here, speakers insist on using the word as it was used in the 1700s, where democracy connoted something like the unconstrained tyranny of the majority. But today in the West, the word democracy also often connotes an unassailable ideal. People tend to presume that of course we ought to have democracy. The only interesting questions are which form of democracy is best, or how much of life should be subject to democratic control. Democracy is so ascendant an ideal that non-democratic countries pretend to be democratic. In 1936, Hitler held a sham referendum asking citizens whether they favored the German occupation of the Rhineland and Nazi rule. On paper, the 1936 Soviet Constitution vested the supreme power of the state in a national legislature elected through universal, direct, and equal suffrage by secret ballot, with